Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take.
My guests today are a husband and wife duo who formed their rock band in Albany, New York in the year 2000. My guests are famous for performing extensively up and down the East Coast and into the Midwest of America. The band regularly play New York, Boston, Chicago, Atlanta, Jacksonville, and New England. The duo play more than 200 shows per year, and their relentless touring has gained them a cult following and the reputation as the hardest working band in upstate New York. The duo have opened shows for many high-profile artists, including Grace Porter and the Nocturnals, Maroon 5, Blues Traveler, and Cheap Trick. Their music is featured in TV shows, indie movies, and commercials. They regularly feature on the music festival circuit, where they play local festivals, such as Albany's Tulip Fest, the annual charity event, Wildwoodstock, and Larkfest. Today, I'm joined by Melanie Krahmer and Rich Libutti of Sirsy. We discuss their musical backgrounds, how they met one another, what made them decide to form a band, and how they got the reputation as the hardest working band in upstate New York. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you for having us, James.
Thank you kindly for joining me on your take. In the next hour, we're going to uncover a lot of your history and all sorts of things, from your love of music to meeting one another and predominantly forming the band Sirsy back in the year 2000. To start with, do you mind if we wind the clock back? And can I just ask you both, can I ask where you were both born and when? And can you give us a bit of background about your parents, what they did for a living? And do you both have siblings?
That's a big question.
Mm-hmm. You want to start?
Sure.
Okay.
We'll say that I was born a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
That's a great answer.
It was probably the 70s. And I was born in Providence, Rhode Island. And for those not well-versed in the geography of the United States, Rhode Island is the smallest state in the Union. Mm-hmm. And I grew up there with my mom, my dad, and my sister. My sister was a year older than me. No one in my family was musical so much.
Your mom is quite the dancer.
My mom does love to dance. There was always music in the house, but there was no nobody really played any instruments or anything like that. But there was a lot of music in the house. My mom, talking about what they did for a living. My dad did a bunch of different things. He was mostly in construction. He worked with a few different construction companies in and around Rhode Island. And my mom was a nurse, although she took a hiatus from nursing until me and my sister were maybe like 12 or 13. And I have a lot of memories of AM Gold being played a lot, especially when we went driving around. And that became kind of a guilty pleasure for me, I think, for my whole life. All the 70s kind of bubblegum pop,
still to this day.
Oh yeah, like Seals and Crofts and 10cc, ELO. It's still actually one of my favorites. My mom, I was listening to a lot of disco, even into the early 80s, I think, because she likes dancing so much. Mm-hmm. They were always listening to a lot of music all the time. What do you got?
So, well, I'm a little bit younger than my husband.
You can say considerably. I'm fine with that.
And I was born so we always call ourselves the country mouse and the city mouse. So he was born in Providence, Rhode Island, in the big city. And I was born in a very small town in upstate New York called Pattersonville, New York. We did not even have a stoplight. We had our big claim to fame is a rug store and a Christmas tree farm in town. So it's a very small town and very rural America. And I grew up near a dairy farm. And my dad was a piano player, and not a professional piano player, but he played piano in like old school rock and roll and old school honky tonk bands. And so, my musical beginnings came from my dad for sure, because I grew up listening to the music that he listened to and the music that he played in his band and the music my mom listened to, which was rock and roll. So I grew up with a love of, the Beatles and the Everly Brothers and the Doors and Queen and all that good stuff. And then I also had an appreciation of music from my grandmother, who had this old record player at her house, and she used to play all the old jazz records. So I learned about Ella Fitzgerald from her, and who was not her favorite, but was my favorite. She loved Etta James and Lou Rawls. And she loved Lou Rawls. So I would listen to all these old jazz records at my grandmother's house. And then unfortunately, I'm, kind of a child of the 80s who grew up listening to 80s music for better or worse. Some of my first music that I had that was not from my parents or my grandmother was Michael Jackson and Whitney Houston. And I had a Devo 45 record of Whip It.
That's a great record.
Great single. Yeah. So that was kind of like my musical beginnings. But my dad, my dad was not a professional musician. He was he did many things. He was a blue collar worker. He was a welder, and then he got laid off from welding, and he became what they call a parts runner. And he would drive a truck and bring parts from one plant to another, and sometimes odd jobs, and he kind of struggled a little. But he was a piano player from his heart. Like that's what he would do for his, his passion. Yeah. Then my mom was always a bookkeeper. My dad did not go to college. My mom, I don't think my dad even graduated high school, right? I don't think so. My mom was the oldest of 2 siblings. And so she sacrificed her chance to go to college so that her brother could go. And she went to school to get her bookkeeping degree. Although she did accounting her whole life, she wasn't officially an accountant.
She still does our taxes every year. The Sirsy taxes.
Yeah. So, but my mom is really great with numbers. She's not so musical. Good dancer. My mom too. Both of our moms. Mm-hmm. Never made that connection.
They like to boogie. Yeah.
And then I have one half sister who is quite a bit older than me from my dad's first marriage, who she's got some musical talent and love. And then I have a younger sister who is musical and also artistic. And that's kind of, can I answer it all?
Interesting biographical information on you both coming from different backgrounds and citing some interesting musical influences. I wanted to move on to schooling, and I wanted to ask you both the same question. Where were you both schooled, and do you have particularly fond memories of your time there? And would you describe yourself as academic, and did you go on to further education?
I think we were both very nerdy. We were both very good students. And I, did all my, grade school and high school stuff in Rhode Island. And then I went to college in upstate New York, which is where, we live now. And that's how I moved up to this area.
That's how we met.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have very fond memories of school. It wasn't, there's always challenges when you're younger and there's bullies but I feel like I got off pretty easy with that. And I feel very fond about the time I spent. I would say, especially in high school, which is where I really started doing music. I can remember the very first day that I guess I became a musician. It was my first day of high school.
Mm.
The person that was sitting behind me in homeroom, who I never met before, just tapped me on the shoulder and he said, "Hi, my name is Steve. I play guitar. You should get a bass because then we could be in a band and we can meet girls." So I did that. I convinced my parents that, a bass is something I should have. We joke all the time that the thing he didn't tell me is the bass player's pretty low on the totem pole for actually getting a girlfriend. But that eventually worked out. But I played in bands with my friend Steve and a bunch of other folks in high school, and we formed a band called the Spud Masters. I don't know, or were it the Spud Muffins or the Spud Masters?
You're asking me.
Something with the word Spud in it, and I remember
something teenage boys would come up with.
Somebody drew artwork with. They basically made our faces out of potatoes.
Okay, yeah, I like that.
But every single person in that band is a professional musician or a music teacher in some fashion, which I find to be pretty amazing. That is the case.
Yeah, there's a lot of artistic people from your high school. I feel like every one of your friends that we meet is either a filmmaker or an artist in some way.
I was very lucky that that group of people are in really encouraged me to do that stuff. It's difficult when you are a good student because your parents and your teachers are always trying to steer you away from an artistic career because they feel like it's too risky. When you're young, they say, "Oh, you want to be a ballerina, you want to be a musician, you want to be an actor." You can be anything you want. But then when it comes time to go to college, they're like, "Well, maybe you should pick something
go for
that's
business, or
that's
something stable."
Yeah. So it's an interesting change as you grow as a musician. And so, I stuck with it. I went to school for biology for college. But really, music was always the thing that drove me, and it made me laugh, made me cry, gave me goosebumps, and biology never gave me goosebumps. So music always kind of pulled me back in. And then when I met Melanie, it became a reality. We were able to somehow carve a life from that.
Yep.
I'm getting ahead.
Yeah.
Melanie, would you say your experiences of school were similar to your husband's?
Yeah, I would say, I've always kind of been an upstate New York girl, and I went to high school there, and I had a very great, it was a relatively rural high school, but I had a really great music teacher who was very invested in the music program. So I was very lucky to have that. And I joined everything that was available to me, the jazz band and the show choir and the summer theater and any sort of extracurricular thing involving music I joined. But I was also a good student, straight A student, and similar to you, when it got time to go towards college, all my teachers and, all the adults in my life were telling me, well, you shouldn't try to get a career in music. That's more of a hobby, and you should really, unless you want to be a music teacher, that's, always acceptable. You should go for something more academic. And I guess I caved into that pressure, and I actually went to college in upstate New York for political science and English. I did a double major, and then I was pre-law, and then I ended up changing my major partway through because I don't know, who knows what they want to do when they're 18 and you go to college,
I have a hard time seeing you as a lawyer.
I know. And then, I had these, naive, young ideals at the time that I was going to be the kind of lawyer that only helped people that were innocent. and who needed a lawyer, and the underprivileged and the underdog. Of course, that was the kind of lawyer I wanted to be. And then I kind of grew up a little and realized that doesn't exist.
It does in the movies,
right?
But I think that's
so. And then I ended up becoming a psychology major. I graduated with a psychology degree with a minor in English, and did not go on to law school. I had this kind of epiphany in the middle of sitting for my LSATs, which is the test you take to go to law school, that I did not want to be there or do that. And so I just walked out of the test and never looked back, and had a real job for maybe 3 months out of college. Was hired as an intern at a drug and alcohol rehab as a counselor with my psychology degree. And I worked with all different populations there. And they laid me off because they laid off people who didn't have seniority. And I had met Rich at the time, and we started playing music. And I never really realized that that could be a career until I met him. And then when they called me back to work, I just didn't go. So, yeah.
Rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that this early on in the interview, we've already established your loves of music, your background, particularly you, Melanie, coming from a musical background. And you've both cited so many influences and a huge variety of them. I wanted to obviously shortly come on to the story of how you met one another and your musical journey together as a married couple. But before, can you share some of your early experiences of playing on the live music scene? And what bands were you part of before forming Sirsy? And can you describe the music scene back at that particular time in some of those early musical ventures?
I was never really in a band that was successful at all before Sirsy. I was in a lot of bands where we would rehearse. This one band I was in, I don't even think we had a name. We rehearsed in the drummer's bedroom. It wasn't just the two of us. It wasn't creepy. That sounds bad when I first said that. But it was a keyboard player and a drummer and me. And I don't think we ever played a gig out in public. We only played in the drummer's bedroom. And then I was in a band called Nobody. We called ourselves Nobody, all lowercase letters. Of course, we wore all black. And we played at a rock club in Albany called the QE2. You played there.
Yeah, many times.
That doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And we did, I don't know, alternative rock, and didn't smile at all. So that was kind of what Nobody did. And then when I met Rich, I actually auditioned for, I was a freshman in college. Yeah, I auditioned for a disco cover band to make extra money, and walked into the audition and saw this guy there with a Star Wars shirt on, and I'm a Trekkie. So, we bonded over our love of science fiction and music, and we became friends, and we played in that disco band for a little while. We called ourselves Libutti, which was named after his last name, but spelled Labooty.
That's horrible.
Yeah, we did that for about 6 months and got bored. We made really good money, but we were bored. And so then Rich and I started writing music together, and shortly thereafter formed Sirsy. So, and I was in another band called the Milkweeds. We weren't very good.
Rich,
Yeah.
The same question to you. I know you've already discussed forming a band at high school and meeting your friend.
The Spuds or whatever.
I think you said Steve. Can you tell me about some of the early other musical ventures before forming Sirsy?
Yeah, the Spud Muffins, I'm going to say it was. We, did a lot of, we'll say like 80s hits and 70s stuff. I don't remember the total catalog, but I remember, I think we did a Billy Idol song, Dancing with Myself. And then we, did a bunch of classic rock type covers. I'm sure that we were butchering them. But it is interesting because a lot of the bands that had careers in the 70s and then tried to carry that over into the 80s, it was interesting because they had careers long enough where they could change their style enough and be more like 80s, like David Bowie, Elton John, Hall & Oates. When I started playing in bands in the very late 80s and early 90s, there was a shift here in the United States between kind of like hair metal bands like Bon Jovi and Poison, of course, and Motley Crue. And then grunge happened here. Like once Pearl Jam's first video showed up on MTV, it was like grunge happened overnight. But a lot of those, it was a different transition because all the old bands just disappeared and all the new bands were popping up and they were grunge. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and a lot of bands that I was in the early 90s were trying to emulate that. So, I was in a band called Empire, and we were writing songs that were kind of in that grunge vein, sometimes maybe even in that kind of funk rock metal, like Living Color or Faith No More, just in that kind of style.
I used to have a crush on the singer of Faith No More.
Oh yeah.
I remember
Mike Patton.
when his music video would come on and he did that thing where his face went up close to the screen.
Yeah.
I used to sit in front of the TV and go,
that's something you liked?
I do.
I'll have to keep that in mind.
Not anymore, but I did when I was a kid. Yeah.
So I played with that band Empire for a few years. We released a couple of things, and then me and John, I was playing bass in this band, and the guitar player, my friend John, we started a recording studio like I feel every musician did in the 90s. And I met a couple of other musicians in the local area, one of which was the drummer that invited Melanie to audition for this cover band.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually in that studio in a basement in Latham, New York, that we had the audition. And that's where I first met Melanie.
Uh-huh.
You've both given us an insight into you both meeting and obviously sharing this common love of music. But let's turn the clock back some 22 years ago, a significant moment in both of your lives and pivotal, the year 2000, when you both formed the duo Sirsy. I wanted to ask where the name came from and how would you describe the band's sound and what made you decide to work as a duo and not with other band members?
Yeah, so, the name came from me. My sister, my younger sister, who we talked about earlier, she used to call me Sirsy instead of sister or sissy. So growing up, it was my nickname from her. And we spelled it phonetically Sirsy because we were little kids. So we just sort of spelled it out how it sounded. And growing up, that was always what she called me. And I used to sign all my cards, Love Sirsy and things like that. So when Rich and I were trying to find a band name, I had suggested it because it wasn't a word, but it was personal to me. And he kind of liked it. And so we went with that. We weren't totally aware of the Circe in Greek mythology at the time, who I believe the Game of Thrones character is named after, spelled differently. That's just kind of a coincidence. And apparently one of the things she does is she sang in the, was it the Odyssey? I think Circe's in the Odyssey, and she sings and lures Ulysses and his men, all the sailors, into her island. And then she turns them into pigs and keeps them as her pets. But she does redeem herself by the end of the story because she falls in love with Ulysses' soul. And so she turns the men back into men and lets them go. But that was really not where we named the band. It's just a nickname of mine. And do you want to take the other part of the?
Well, the two-person band was a struggle to get to. We tried to make things work with other people.
Kind of a trial and error thing.
So you did audition other musicians. one stage.
Yeah, we started as a two-person songwriting team, and more of like the traditional thing that you would expect. Because, well, 2000 was not long after Lilith Fair and all that stuff. And we loved all the Lilith Fair artists and things like that. And that was definitely a big influence on our sound, right?
Yeah.
And so it was more what you would expect with a girl singer. He played acoustic guitar. I played some percussion kind of stuff, and we would go out and play that way. And then when we would record, we would hire other musicians to come in and record on the records with us. And then we decided, well, we want to play them like a full band. Mm-hmm. And so we would try out other people. And
we did try. I mean, we had several drummers, and we had several guitar players, and I was still playing bass, although, I was also playing guitar, but most of my guitar playing was acoustic. When we would play acoustic gigs together, and then we would try to foster this band atmosphere with other people, but it's just so hard to form a band. Like, so many bands end up just hating each other. Like, I love the band The Police, and you hear so many stories of how they all hated each other. And not that we hated everyone that we played with. We played with some very talented people and some very nice people. But Melanie and I were really dedicated to just being out there. Like, for us, the best way to get our music out there was to be performing nonstop all over the country and traveling. And a lot of musicians have girlfriends or boyfriends, or, they have kids, so it's a very difficult life. And we have a unique situation because we are a couple. So, we are not leaving our loved ones at home. So I think that made it very difficult to have a very steady lineup. So after a couple of years of trying to make that work, we just said we need to figure out a way to make it work with the two of us. And we thought for sure it was going to be a failure, but it was one of those things that once we did it, we were like, this feels so right. And we wish we had done it earlier, but we wouldn't have got there without that journey of we auditioned so many people.
Oh my God.
So many weird stories. People with,
we could tell you,
well,
I'll tell you I'll just tell you two quick stories of just the worst auditions. Okay. This is not even a joke. So we're in a basement of a house that we're renting. So it's not a glamorous setting. So just picture cement floor basement, right?
Yeah.
And we're there trying to audition a guitar player. And at the time we had a drummer who was steady with us, and Rich was the bass player, and I was just singing. So we're trying to find a guitar player, and we had auditioned maybe 20 guitar players that day. And this guy comes down into the audition at 2:00 in the afternoon with a case of Bud Light or something like that, beer. And he's cracking one open and asking us all if we want one. And we're like, we're good, man. It's 2 p.m. Like, right?
A little bit too early, maybe later.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
So, and then he starts playing, and I kid you not, James, he had like stripper pants on, like rip away pants.
Yeah. Maybe that was a ploy. Maybe that was a ploy that you think he was going to get the job if he dressed like that. Or
he was playing and he ripped the pants away in the middle of the thing and was there in the shorts playing the guitar solo. And then we said, "Thanks so much. We'll call you." No, it was. And then he had his shorts on and he had to leave the basement. So that was a very awkward audition. And then we, at another point in time, had given up on guitar players and said, well, Rich will play the guitar and the bass and we'll just rotate. And so we said, let's just find a keyboard player. And so we had this guy who was trying to play the keyboards, and his his power supply caught on fire. And there were flames shooting out of the power supply. Again, in the non-glamorous basement. And we said, you're on fire. And he said, I know. And we said, no, literally you're on fire. So it wasn't, the universe was telling us this was not the way to go. So we ended up trying this 2-person thing and learning all the instruments ourselves, and it just seemed to work.
I think there's a book in the making there, memoirs from auditions. I'm sure there's many that you can add to the mix. Rich, my next question's for you, and it's really about the early stages of the band in its infancy. And I wanted to ask, how difficult was it to build a musical reputation, a fan base, and to get regular bookings on the live music scene? And has this work all been done by yourselves, or have you ever had an agent or publicist?
In the early days, we started out just regionally, and it was very difficult. I mean, I think we were both trying to work part-time jobs, especially in those years where we had not got to the point where we were a 2-person band, because I feel like things really started to take off for us when we became the duo. But in the early days, it's a struggle. I mean, we were waitressing you were waitressing, and I was working a couple of just random odd jobs. I was trying to do the studio thing still.
You worked at a toy store.
I worked at a toy store.
Mm-hmm.
I worked at an ice cream shop.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that was allowed me to take the time off in case we did get a show, because the dream was just to have so many shows that you didn't have to have this other job. But for 3 years or so, it was a really big struggle. And then it got to the point where we were doing really well in the summers in this area, because there's a lot of like outdoor concerts, and there's just feels like there's much more of a music scene in the warmer months. In the winter in upstate New York, a lot of people get, they just want to stay home. They don't want to go out in the snow and the cold.
We started working a lot of the ski areas at the time.
Yeah.
And early on, we didn't have enough originals to play just totally all original music for the shows. So in order to get paid, sometimes we would have to mix in enough covers to cover several sets and things like that. So we kind of like did that a little bit early on.
And it was 2000, so there was no Facebook.
No.
There was even MySpace didn't even exist yet. So
Right.
being that we're kind of nerdy and tech savvy, we did have a website, but that doesn't mean that anybody ever went to it. So a lot of our marketing was just word of mouth in different areas, or we would do gig swaps with other bands, which is something we still do today. So like, if we wanted to play in a market with a band in Syracuse that's about 150 miles away from here, then we would have them come and play with us in our area, and then we would go play with them in their area. And that was a very effective way to expand
And also build a community feel for other musicians that we knew. Yeah.
And we used to get more fans and get them engaged, we would have an actual physical mailing list. So people would sign up and
stamps.
We would send postcards with all our dates on them that we would send in the mail, which
is insane.
Yeah. I mean,
but that's expensive. It wasn't really, we were in the early days of email lists, I guess, so.
And then, as we progressed through, and I think it was you were doing most of the bookings for us in the early days.
And I used to have to actually print out like the biography and photos and put a physical CD in an envelope and mail it to a club in order to get a show. And now, of course, everything's digital, but back in 2000, it was
the year 2000.
It wasn't so much that. So
we move forward to the digital age and pretty much to the present. And Melanie, incredibly now you play around about 200 live dates a year.
Yeah.
And you're known for playing extensively up and down the US East Coast and into the Midwest. I wanted to ask you, do you have any favorite venues and areas you perform? And if so, why? And what have been your experiences of the festival circuit? And do you have any particular memorable moments?
I would say right off the top of my head, one of my favorite clubs we play is a club. It's kind of a famous club. It's not huge. It's a famous club in New York City in Greenwich Village called the Bitter End. And it's been around since the 60s. So everyone's played there, from Bob Dylan to Lady Gaga. And it's, you know, it's a listening room. So it's a great experience when you get to play there as a musician. And we've played shows there with a lot of our friends. And, you know, it's just a really great experience. The history of the club is there. I've played piano. They have a piano on stage. And so I've played their piano. And like, you know, that Stevie Wonder's played that piano, and just so it's cool. So that's, I would say, one of my favorite venues. And then you mentioned the festival circuit. We just played a festival called Mile of Music in Appleton, Wisconsin, of all places. And it is one of my favorite events that we have ever done. They fostered this community of music lovers there. They have these pledges that they have hanging around all the venues. And they call them like pledges of mutual respect. And they say, not only do the musicians have to respect the crowd, but the crowd has to respect the musicians. And they've just really set up this great, even though it's an outdoor festival with lots of alcohol and people are drunk, they are rowdy, but rowdy on the side of the band. No one is ever heckling the band. They're listening. They're not talking when you play. And you have to sign a pledge when you come in that you will not play a cover song. So it's all original bands, all songwriters. And it's pretty remarkable, I have to say. So that's definitely a highlight for me.
Me too.
And then a highlight for our career, I would say I'm a huge fan of Grace Potter, and we were able to open for her a few times, to the point where she knew who we were, which was cool. And she came into our sound check one day, kissed me right here on the cheek. I turned into a complete babbling idiot. She's very beautiful. And she had her wardrobe closet there with all of her glitter dresses and things. And she was trying to choose what she was going to wear. And, you know, I said something ridiculously dumb, like, I like your sparkly dress, or something horrible like that. And was mortified. But anyway, that night she was
all down to nerves.
Yeah, she was recording a live record that night, and she mentioned us on the live record. She said something really nice about us on the record, and did not edit it out. So we ended up, our name and the little thing she said about us went out on her live record, which for me was pretty cool.
That's definitely cool.
So what have you got?
What do I got?
Yeah.
I like the Mile Music Festival is also amazing. There's a big festival here in Austin called South by Southwest, which is, you know, the ultimate thing you're supposed to want to do as an indie band. And so we did that many times. Like, I think we did it 5 years in a row.
Is that the one in Austin, Texas?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's huge. I mean, it's become a monster. It's, you know, it's grown way past just having indie bands. You know, they have world famous, like before he passed away, Prince played at South by Southwest. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of grown into this whole little monster, and it is an experience. If you're an indie band, you definitely have to do it. But it is brutal. We started calling it South by South Stress because, you know,
oh, that's great.
You're booked for 7 shows in 4 days.
Yeah.
There's no parking. There's every unmarked white van in the United States.
There's probably
is in
parking
this one
if
city.
you're Prince, but not if you're us.
Yeah. And like we have kind of a unique setup because of the 2-person configuration. Melanie has basically a one-of-a-kind stand-up drum kit that we made. So we would have to put that on a cart and then bring it up 6th Street in Austin, like a mile, you know, it's because you can't drive. There's so many people, you can't drive up to any of the gigs.
Picture The Walking Dead, basically, when you see one of those movies and it's the zombies, that's what 6th looks like. Yeah. It's just a crowd of slow moving drunk people walking down the street, and you have to load your gear through that.
But it is an experience. I mean, it's, you know, something that I've always wanted to do. And, you know, so we did it for many, many years.
Yeah.
So it was super memorable.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a highlight, but it was definitely
memorable.
You know, just a crazy life experience to be part of.
Rich, a question for you next. I wanted to ask, the band have a cult following, and you've been called the hardest working band in upstate New York. How would you describe your fan base, and how do you go about releasing your music, and which platforms do you find are the most effective for you both, and why?
Okay. I mean, our fans are nothing short of amazing. I mean, you know, we've always been very engaging with our fans, even before, you know, social media. We always try to involve them as much as possible, because we're very well aware that without them, we don't have a band. We don't have a musical career. So the most important aspect of that is our fans. So we've always tried to be very respectful to our fans. And even in the early days, before Kickstarter and all that stuff, we did a sponsorship program for our first CD, where we said, hey guys, we really want to record a CD and we want to make it very high quality. Maybe you guys want to sponsor our CD, i.e. give us money, and then we'll put your name in the actual liner notes. And we started doing that very early on. And we've done that crowdfunding thing basically on our own, just on our website, with some fans of ours that have become friends, and they're very tech savvy with computer things, and they've helped us design these interfaces on our website.
Are you shouting out the chat?
I am shouting out to Chad Denise. You know, so that we don't have to be part of the Kickstarter, you know, where they take a percentage, you know, sort of thing. We had this basically built our own community of
that operates like Kickstarter.
Yeah, and they're almost like shareholders in the band, and so that's something that we've been doing since the very beginning. Mm-hmm. There was another component to your question after the cult following.
What types of platforms do we like to release?
Platforms. Wow. That has changed immensely over the years. In the early years, we would sell tons of CDs, just physical CDs. And then when iTunes came around,
at $15 a CD.
Yeah. And then when iTunes came around and you could purchase CDs, there was like a kind of a natural shift between the physical units and then people downloading our stuff. And that was actually kind of nice, because you didn't have to front the money to buy 5,000 CDs and carry them around. And so there was like a nice just change in that. And then when streaming happened, that basically fell off a cliff. And that's fine. I mean, we're never going to go back to, a state where people are paying for music. Basically, people will stream music. We stream our music as well when we listen. And it's a great convenience to be able to listen to anything you want and just pay.
Mad at people for streaming,
just pay $10 a month. But I would say our fans have really, come through with us. Like, a lot of fans will come to shows and they'll be like, I stream you guys so much, I love your music. And they just throw like some money in a tip jar at one of our shows, just because they want to support. There's a lot of people out there that want to support independent music. And they find ways to do that. They buy shirts, they sponsor our CDs.
We have a tour sponsorship too, where they sponsor Miles on our tour. And we give them exclusive merch. And our fans are just awesome.
Yeah.
They're awesome. Yeah.
I wanted to both ask you a question now and move on to record deals. And I wanted to turn the clock back around about 12 years to 2010, and you signed a record deal with Fanzalo Records. Mm-hmm. What made you decide to sign to the label, and can you describe your relationship with them and the studio albums you released, And what made you eventually decide to part terms with the label?
Can we swear?
You can indeed, yeah. Do what
That'll
you
be
like.
instrumental in describing our relationship with the label.
It's always an interesting moment when you mentioned labels, because I've spoken to quite a few musicians and I say, we come onto the part now where you signed a record label, which was surely one of the highlights of your career, and it all kind of goes gradually downhill. And they say, worst thing I ever did was sign a contract.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing is, when you start a band, you think you want to have a record deal. That's supposed to be the thing. That's the holy grail, right? That's the brass ring, the thing you're looking for. And so we had a really great entertainment lawyer who became a fan of ours, actually saw us at the bitter end and was rooting for us and kept trying to help us get connections in the music world. And we had a manager early on who was wonderful, Scott, who worked for some record labels in Manhattan, was trying to shop us to different labels, and nothing ever clicked. And this entertainment lawyer knew this guy who ran this indie label, and he had been very connected. Like he had a long career in music, and he looked really great on paper
as a manager.
Yeah.
And then when the industry changed, he decided to create his own label.
Yeah, and he had really done all these things. He was really very accomplished with that, and we vetted him quite extensively, and we signed the deal with him. And
it's like you say, with the label, it was as if the doors opened up and doves flew out. We're like, oh, we're signing a label. We took photos of us signing the contract. We got so much great press, like
he got us an agent
locally,
to help book us. And
and it was like, finally, this is what we've been working for.
Did it. And then we quickly learned that a lot of the contacts that he no longer had, because he was
a dick.
In other words, he pissed them all off by the signs.
Yes.
Okay.
So unfortunately, we could not build bridges with a lot of those contacts because he had burned them all.
Some of them were
some of them we did. We were able to meet some really great producers who we still work with to this day, who had won award. They won a Grammy, and they're really amazing, talented people that still work with us. And we met a lot of musicians almost as sort of a support group who had survived this man. And so we made connections that way. And we like to look at it like, you pay for a college education and you learn things. We lost a lot of money on this record deal, and we paid for a music business education through it all. So we learned a lot. We grew from it.
I mean, ultimately when you sign a label, really the thing you're hoping to do is reach a bigger audience, make more money, so that you're not just struggling and living hand to mouth. And when that was not happening after, 6 months to a year, it turns out the booking agent that they hooked us up with, we were kind of a small fish for them. So, this is a common thing we talk to a lot of musicians about. When you sign with a booking agency, you have zero control over how much that they book you. You're just at their whim. And when we were booking for ourselves, and when I say we, I mean Melanie's working on it every single day. She's trying to book. When you're with a bigger agency, they're not really so concerned about the small fish, which we were at the time. So that made it very difficult. That was kind of kneecapped us with the way that we had been traditionally getting ourselves out there, performing in front of people. And that ultimately sabotaged us financially. So we worked very hard to get out of that, which normally is difficult to begin with. It's even more difficult with the licensing because, you as a musician, you want to get your masters back. So we really fought very hard to get those back. And
We did.
To
We
summarize,
did get all of our masters.
we got it back because we were annoyingly persistent.
Yep.
At getting them back.
And out of interest, I'm not going to sort of loom on it in any more detail, but obviously when you sign a contract, you're obviously tied into that contract for a number of years unless you decide to break away from that and come to some sort of mutual agreement. Did you have to take any legal action in order to escape the contract itself and the whole business agreement that you agreed originally?
Yes, I think that the what's the word I'm looking for? The way we decided to handle it was to be as annoying as possible until the president of the label said, well, maybe we should part ways. And we said, you know what? That's a great idea. So then we called our lawyer who we had been working with, our entertainment lawyer. And he said, okay, let me just try to see, so terminating the contract wasn't a big deal. It was because I think we were both in agreement that it wasn't working and we were going to terminate, but they did not want to give us our songs back. So that was really the sticking point. And
they still wanted to control our catalog.
At the end of the day, I used basically their contract against them because we were supposed to be getting quarterly reports from them about our sales on streaming and such, and just in general. And we weren't getting those. And so our lawyer was persistently calling them, was calling them a lot saying that, we want an accurate reporting. We want an accurate reporting. And so finally, I believe we threatened to have an accountant go in. They have you can have a forensic accountant go in and look through their records. And that was when they basically said, okay, you can have your songs back. So that kind of basically worked out. We really lucked out in that situation because we did get a fair amount of licensing and things after that. And that money came directly to us and not having to split it with the label. So
an interesting part of your story, and in fairness, in any career or any life story, we go through ups and downs, and it seemed like there were many problems with the deal itself, but there were some positives to come out of it as well, which we won't dwell on it anymore. I kind of want to move on now and talk about the recording process. And how do you go about composing and writing your material? And back to studio albums you've released to date, which are you most proud of? And has there been a producer or mixer that you've particularly enjoyed collaborating with?
I would say Paul Coldery, who we did meet through the label, has been a wonderful collaborator with us, and has helped. He has produced and mixed our last several records, and we learned a lot from him. And I feel that he made the recording process go much better for us.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's difficult when you're the band and you're trying to self-produce your record because you're the one that says, yes, I nailed that take. And you never feel that you nailed the take. So you always want to do it again and you beat yourself up in the studio and things like that. So it's great to have an outside set of ears that you trust in there with you to say, you're not singing it again. We're done. Move on to the next thing. And we 100% trust him.
Yeah.
So he's been really wonderful to work with. We learned so much from him. And I would say I'm really proud of the records that we made with him. Our Like a Drum EP, our newest single, Astronauts, I think is one of the recordings I am the most proud of. Which we actually recorded during the pandemic. So we weren't even ever in the same room with him. We sent files back and forth. We recorded it in our studio here in our house and sent the files to him, and he mixed things in his studio and sent us feedback back and forth. So it took a lot longer, but it was what we did to stay quarantined and safe from COVID. So it was definitely an interesting experience.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way about Paul. You know, we when we were on the label, we basically worked with a couple of different producers, kind of in an audition kind of way. And there was a couple that were, you know, had very nice pedigrees, but they were not the right fit for us. I feel like
They weren't
Paul-
very collaborative.
No, they basically were just basically said, you play this and I'll record it. With Paul, there's like some give and take. Like Paul has a lot of suggestions, and I got to say, a lot of them I really like.
Yeah.
But if you know, like there's a few things with guitar parts, I'd be like, oh, I kind of like this thing here. And he'd be like, all right, he said, that's good, but maybe try this. And then we try it out. And at the end of the day, I think we always come into agreement about which one works better. And I feel like a lot of his ideas have helped us when we're just even writing, as far as like song dynamics and techniques and little song devices. I think it's kind of helped us to really fine tune our craft as songwriters. And he's been, I think, a big part of that.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A question for you both again. How did you venture into the film and television world where you've composed music for commercials and your music's also been featured in movies and TV serials? Can you discuss some of those projects you've worked on? And I also wanted to ask you, do you currently have a publishing deal?
We have we do have a licensing deal. It's a non-exclusive licensing deal. So for people out there learning about that and wondering what that is, if you have an exclusive licensing deal, it means that agency will shop your songs and no other agency can shop your songs. If you have a non-exclusive, you have a deal with them, but you can also have other agencies shop your songs. They put like this kind of code on the end of it, like a fingerprint almost, so that they can prove that they've gotten you a placement versus someone else. So we have an agency that we work with quite a bit who's gotten us the bulk of the publishing and licensing stuff that we've gotten, including a TV show called Shameless, which is a pretty popular TV show.
A lot of production companies, music supervisors don't want to work directly with the musicians because it gets legally a little bit difficult for them. So, you know, they usually like to go to, you know, an actual company that will make sure that we own the songs free and clear, you know, so it avoids legal entanglements for them. So the company we work with is based out of Detroit, Michigan. They're called North Star Media.
But we have another friend who runs a publishing company out of Brooklyn, Hidden Pond, and she tries to get us licensing stuff as well. And there's a couple of other things like that. Just from connections we've made, you know, being in this business for so long, friends we've made, you know, we all try to help each other out whenever we can. We got the North Star Media thing through actually a website called Reverb Nation, which a lot of people know about. And there's a lot of weird stuff on that website, but this was actually a real thing. Yeah. It's, for those who don't know what it is, it's almost like
it's like job listings
for musicians.
Sure.
So they'll say looking for, you know, a rock band who has songs about this, you know, to submit, whatever. So I had submitted us for this thing for North Star Media, looking to sign 5 new artists for a licensing deal. And they chose us out of, I don't know how many thousand entries. And then we met the guy in person at South by Southwest, and we became one of his artists. And then he got us a bunch of placements. So it worked out well. Was there another part to your question though that we didn't answer?
Not really, no. I was going to move on with the next question, because earlier on in our conversation, I think Melanie mentioned some of the artists you've met on your musical journey, and you've opened for several bands and high-profile artists, from Grace Potter and the Nocturnals, Maroon 5, Blues Traveler, Cheap Trick, and many more. Do you have any stories or fond memories from opening for these acts? And have you managed to build a relationship or rapport with any of them after those opportunities?
I would say, well, the story of Grace Potter kissing me is a fun memory for sure. We were never really able to tour more than like a couple times with, I think, some of these bands, but there is a band who we should shout out, who we've built quite the relationship with. They're called the Adam Ezra Group, and they are out of, well, he was originally based in Boston. We have developed quite the relationship with them. They've become good friends, and we've opened for them many, many times. And they are just incredibly kind. Not only are they talented and a great band, they're incredibly kind. They constantly do charity events, and they have this wonderful community atmosphere that they've set up with a lot of bands with whom they are friends. And, their fans all, it's like, you support all the bands in this community. It's not a thing where if you just like this one band, you can only like this one band. Yes. So it's been really wonderful to, be in that community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very supportive musical community.
Yeah. So I would say that they were a very, very great.
Yeah. The Maroon 5 thing was interesting because we were aware of them because
Our manager
Scott, before we signed the record deal, worked at a label in New York City, and he had this CD by a band called Maroon 5. Said the CD's been out for a little while.
Clive Davis's label.
Yeah. And he said, but I think that you guys will like them. And then we did. We loved the CD, but it was like kind of before anybody knew who they were. And they came to a very small club in Albany called Valentine's. Mm-hmm. And we went to that show, and
bought tickets.
It's very tiny. We were one of 5 or 6 people in the audience. There was just nobody there because no one knew who they were. So that's when we actually met them, and we talked to them, became friends with them. And then when they came back to the area next time,
they had a much bigger crowd.
They played, we played with them in a room with about 3,000 people. And then the next time after that, it was 5,000 people. And then the next time after that, they were playing in a stadium that we could not open for them anymore.
But they gave us tickets.
They did.
Well, because they were on a bill with Train and
Matchbox 20.
Or sorry, Matchbox 20 and Sugar Ray.
Yeah.
And Maroon 5. They were doing like a tour together, the 3 bands. And Maroon 5 was technically the opening act of those 2 bands. So they didn't have any poll or anything. They were playing huge places, but they did give us tickets when they came to town. We got to go to the show.
Sorry, Melanie and Rich, I've got one final question for you both, and then we come on to that point. And it's the point where we ask every single Your Take guest the same 13 quickfire questions to end the interview, and just establish some things that maybe we've not established in the last hour. But we'll move on to that in just a moment. The final one, we're going to kind of move away from music now. First question is, how challenging is it to work professionally as a husband and wife team? And outside of work, what are your hobbies? What do you like to do to relax? Do you have children? And what are your musical long-term plans? A lot of questions in there.
Yeah.
No children.
No children.
Pet fish.
Yeah.
They're over there, which is why I pointed. No children. Pet fish.
We've worked out the being married and being professional partners. I'm not going to say that we keep them separate because they spill over into each other. Like, sometimes I can't say, for instance, if we're rehearsing, I don't like that part that you're playing, without getting the wife look, and vice versa. It's a little easier to get your feelings hurt when it's your loved one,
However,
constructive criticism.
It's easier to be honest.
Yeah. But we've worked that out over the years. We haven't killed each other. And I feel like, we have a really good work/marriage relationship balance. So
hobbies. Well, you like to ride your bike.
I do.
I like to hike and take long walks and be in nature.
Is drinking beer a hobby?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with
You like to cook?
alcohol as a hobby. Yeah. hard
He likes to
drinking.
cook.
Yeah.
I like to read. We watch probably a little too much TV.
We both are sci-fi nerds, so we watch. We've been watching all the
New Star Trek
shows and the Star Wars on Disney, and nerdy stuff like that, just to unwind. We don't like to watch TV shows about music because it sucks us back into our actual lives. So,
Right, we come to that moment, as I briefly mentioned earlier on. Every single Your Take guest has been asked these questions. They're quick fire ones, just to kind of ease you at the end of the interview, put you in the kind of, I guess, the psychiatrist chair, find out a bit more about you outside of your career in music. Here we go. You ready?
Ready.
Right, Sirsy, here we go. Number one, what would you say is your favorite pastime?
Like besides music.
Yeah, besides music. Although I'll accept
Hiking.
music.
Hiking for
I
me.
would say cycling.
Cycling and hiking. We touched upon film very briefly because we mentioned composing for indie films, for television serials and commercials as well. But if you had to choose your favorite film, what would it be and why?
Mine's easy. The Empire Strikes Back. It's just the time of my life it came around. It was a life-changing movie for me.
Breakfast at Tiffany's. Watched that movie many times with my grandmother. So when I watch it, I feel like I'm still with her, and I very much identify with Audrey Hepburn's character.
From a movie icon, Audrey Hepburn,
Mm.
and Empire Strikes Back, which I still think is the best Star Wars film. And I managed to see it during the pandemic here. They did a re-release of it, and I managed to see it in the cinema. I think it was the 40th anniversary? It must be. Yeah, it must be.
Must have been, yeah.
Yeah,
'Cause it was
1980.
1980.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
and it's still, for me, it still stood up well.
Yeah, me too.
Considering, it's 40 years old. And yeah, I agree with you. It's my favorite Star Wars film.
Yes.
Yeah.
Aside from cinema, now we move on to novels. Who would you say is your favorite novelist?
I don't know if I have one favorite author. I really enjoy, fiction. And my favorite book of all time is J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye. I am not a serial killer. I know that is the favorite book of many serial killers. But when I read it in school, I fell in love with Holden Caulfield. And so it's just always been my favorite book. But I recently read a book called The Fog Cellar. I don't remember the name of the author, but I very much enjoyed that book. That's a recent fiction book that I enjoyed.
For me, mine stays nerdy, and I would say probably my favorite author is Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote 2001, and a bunch of other very nerdy space books.
Two very good choices. I do love Catcher in the Rye. It's just a great novel. And Arthur C. Clarke, I'm a huge fan of 2001, and I love Kubrick's masterpiece. The film version is just it's just a masterpiece.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you both could have had a different profession outside of music, what would you have chosen?
Astronaut for me. Not a lot of jobs though.
Well, right. And you wear glasses.
And I wear
so you're
glasses.
probably not qualified, right?
Yeah.
I actually have thicker glasses than Rich, but I'm just wearing contacts. My vision is much worse than his, actually. For me, I think it would be some sort of social work or counseling. I very much enjoyed the short. I don't know if I want to say enjoyed. It was difficult. It's a very difficult, heart-wrenching job, but it's very rewarding to have a job where you can help others. So I could see myself doing that. Yeah.
Next, we move on to inspirations. But who would you say has been the greatest inspiration in your lives?
Mm. I mean, that's a tough one. I would say you, but
I was thinking you.
I know. Can I say
You're
you?
the strongest person that I've ever met.
I would
It's
say
true.
that Rich is my biggest fan and has encouraged me to do things that I would never in a million years have thought I was capable of doing.
Yeah, no,
I mean, I could also say in addition to that, like as far as like a lifetime inspiration for me was bringing it back to the beginning of this interview is my friend Steve encouraged me, although I had no musical background or ability, encouraged me to play music. He also encouraged me to try out for a play, which I enjoyed acting in plays for many, many years. He kind of set me down that path. I'm wondering if he didn't sit behind me in homeroom, if that's not where I would be right now. So.
are you still in contact with him, or are you aware
Yes.
of what? Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a music teacher.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So he could be listening back to this.
He could
He
be.
could be.
Yeah. Next one. Do you read a newspaper? And if so, which one?
That's a tricky question these days.
That's a difficult question in the United States.
It's
in
very
2022.
divided
Yeah.
here. Very divided.
They're very similar here politically in the UK as well. Yeah.
We both are we allowed to say?
Yeah, well, we're both very liberal.
Liberal.
So like a lot of the, read the New York Times. We don't have a physical subscription.
We read it online.
But
Try to sometimes get news from more non-emotional sources like
Yes.
Politico
Yes.
and things like that. But I would say, I get an email every day from CNN that tells me the top 5 headlines of the day, just so that you can kind of keep up. So yeah, that's where we land.
yeah.
And sometimes actually I get my news from political humorists. So like we love to watch Jordan Klepper.
And The Daily Show. Yeah.
From newspaper headlines to food, what would you say is your favorite food?
Probably if I had to pick one food, it's pizza.
Yeah, I would say pizza or ice cream. I don't know if ice cream counts as a food.
Ice cream's good. We'll take that. A dessert.
Yeah.
Okay, so this next one stumps a lot of our guests. We asked them to choose their favorite cultural icon. When we say cultural icon, it could be a political leader or figure, somebody that maybe has changed the course of history, done something significant, changed our lives in a maybe radical way. Who would you choose and why?
Well, 2 people come to mind for me.
Could be a musical figure.
Well, I was thinking about when you said change the world. Well, there is a musical figure. That would be a third one though for me. So the 2 women that came to mind immediately when you said change the world, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, of course, and Eleanor Roosevelt came to mind for me instantly. Musically, it would be Paul McCartney. How about you?
I mean, I would say the cultural icons that have had the most influence on my life would be Paul McCartney and George Lucas.
From film to music.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to ask you your favorite curse word. What is it? and why?
You might know my favorite curse word.
You're
better
allowed
than
to
I
say
do.
it as well. Pre the watershed.
What would you say my favorite curse word is? Because you probably hear it a lot.
I don't know.
There's a lot of them.
There are.
I swear like a truck
There
driver.
are.
Not on stage. People don't know this about me because I don't usually swear that much on stage.
I mean, it's hard to go wrong with the classic fuck,
Yeah, I think that's your favorite one.
Yeah.
I seem to be fond of motherfucker for some reason.
That does come.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
But that
Yeah.
seems to be a go-to for me.
You might be cited as the hardest working band in upstate New York, but whenever you get some rest time, what is your favorite holiday place or destination?
Holiday destination. Hawaii.
Yeah. let's say why it was up there for me. And I also enjoy, there's a place in Central California along the coast. It's a couple of cities, in Paso Robles. There's just great hiking along the ocean. It's a beautiful place to just relax and enjoy nature. And we coincidentally try to book a lot of shows in that area, so we have some downtime there.
Yeah.
The question you never want to ask any musician is who is their favorite music artist and their favorite album, particularly when they've cited so many influences here today. If you had to name one, who would the music artist be and what would be the album?
The Beatles, Abbey Road. It's easy for me. Definitely.
That's a great choice.
Yeah. I would say probably for me, it's going to be David Bowie's Hunky Dory.
That's a great
I could listen to the song Life on Mars
Great song.
24/7.
Yeah.
And
I'm getting goosebumps
yeah,
just thinking about that song.
It's a great song.
One of my biggest regrets is not seeing Bowie live. Did you get that opportunity?
No.
I did. I saw him live on the Sound and Vision tour. I think he was touring with, I think Adrian Belew was his guitarist on that tour. And I saw him at a giant stadium, like where I think the New England Patriots play football. And it was, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. Like he starts out the show, he just comes out, he's just playing acoustic guitar and he starts out just doing Space Oddity. And he's got this just giant graphic there. And he's just this little tiny figure that just sounds so huge at the bottom. I mean, it's amazing that you can have that experience in a giant stadium with 60,000 people and still be moved. It was pretty amazing. It was awesome.
Would you say it was one of the most memorable live gigs you've been to, seeing Bowie in person?
I would say that and seeing Paul McCartney at Fenway Park in Boston. those two things were
For me, it was seeing Paul
amazing.
McCartney at Madison Square Garden.
Oh yeah.
Because it was the first time we ever got to see Paul McCartney. And it's funny to think of Madison Square Garden as an intimate venue, but it's intimate compared to Fenway Park. He came out and they did a video montage of his life up on these giant screens. And then they played Magical Mystery Tour. And I could not stop sobbing. Like I just was sobbing uncontrollably. Could not believe that Paul McCartney was there. And then at the end, they ended with, and in the end. And so then I started sobbing again. So
I saw McCartney about 15 years ago in a city called Cardiff in Wales, not far from where I live, about an hour away. And there was a great support act. It was the Manic Street Preachers. And the thing I couldn't get over McCartney, I couldn't get over how laid back he was on stage, and he was performing to about 20,000, I'd say was probably the capacity. And I kind of felt that he was just performing to me in my sort of bedroom. He just seemed totally at ease on stage.
yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen an artist look so relaxed on stage as him. Yeah.
He also, to me, stood out because he had so much joy. Like he wasn't jaded at all. And I thought, how many shows has this man put on? You know, and he would do this thing at the end of the song where he would smile and like lift his guitar up, and he just had this giant grin on his face, and it just seemed so sincere.
It seems so real.
And I thought, wow, it was beautiful, because to think that he still could have that much sincere joy from playing these songs that he had to play so many times. And it just seemed like,
when we saw him at Fenway Park at the stadium, it's an outdoor stadium. They did Live and Let Die, and during the explosive parts, they set off fireworks. And then when the song was over, I remember him leaning on the piano and he goes, "Isn't that ridiculous?" He was just laughing. Yeah. So, but he was like just so enjoying it,
It's interesting because in Britain, he's obviously hailed as the greatest or one of the greatest and most successful songwriters of all time, obviously with that back catalogue with the Beatles and with John Lennon, and then Wings were incredibly successful as well.
Yeah.
But I think one thing we forget is that he is this multi-instrumentalist, and it's incredible that he plays mandolin, guitar, bass, drums, piano. He's just an incredible all-round musician.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Away from Paul McCartney, we could do that as a separate
We could
podcast,
talk about him all day. Yeah.
Okay, last two. What is your greatest achievement to date?
Mine is convincing this young lady to marry me.
Did she instantly say yes?
No, actually, I on our very first date, we met in this basement in Latham, auditioning for a disco cover band. A few months later, I realized I basically love her and want to spend the rest of my life with her. And on our first dates, I asked her to marry me, and she said, "Slow down, Pancho." So I listened, and then 15 years later, I asked again, and she said yes.
Yeah, true story. My greatest accomplishment. I mean, I don't know if this is really an accomplishment. I mean, it is. It's definitely a significant thing that I overcame in my life. I am a 2-time cancer survivor. So I survived cancer twice, and
That's a pretty big achievement.
it's a pretty big achievement, I guess. I would have to say that, I think. Yeah.
The final question now. Melanie Krahmer, Rich Libutti, the band Sirsy. How do you wish to be remembered?
I would like to think that when people think of our performances, I would like to be remembered for our live performances and our music as something that made a positive impact on people's lives. I'd like to be remembered for what I hope is our kindness and how that spirit kind of comes out in our shows and reaches out to our fans. I think for me, that's it.
Yeah, it's interesting that we would just assume that we want to be remembered for the band with all the things that we've done in our lives. But I mean, I feel the same way. I feel like the music that we've put out there is, one of the most important things that we've done with our lives, and would like to be remembered in the same way, that we had some sort of positive impact on someone's life, whether it gave them goosebumps one time or it motivated them to do something in their life differently.
Fine words. That, I would say, is the end chapter, but not obviously the end chapter in your lives and what's ahead in your musical careers. It's 10:30 here UK time, and I think it's probably about 5:30 where you are, but I wanted to take the opportunity to thank you for sharing your life story and you meeting one another and how you formed a successful duo with a big fan base and many lovers of your music. And what's been nice is we've covered so many subjects. So thank you kindly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing all of the research and all the time you put into the interview and the thoughtful questions, and for caring about artists that you just met. And thank you. We hope to meet you in Bristol someday in person.
Yeah, that would be great. And a final shout out, can I ask you both to tell us how we listen to your music? How do we find out more about Sirsy? How do we download tracks and albums? Where do we go?
I should probably send most people to our MySpace page. That's really hopping these. Oh no,
Still exist?
It's probably still out there somewhere in a cache. But so you can go to sirsy.com, sirsy.com, and there are links to all of our social media sites. From there, you can find us on Facebook and Spotify and Instagram and YouTube and all those things. Yep.
From my point of view, an enjoyable and insightful interview, or I'd rather say conversation. I imagine you've done many interviews, but I hope you've enjoyed it. And thank you once again for your time.
Thank you, James. We appreciate it. Thank you.